All right, welcome everybody to another video in decisions. Today we're going to be learning how to utilize external forms with decisions. Just a couple of caveats. By no means is this video a tutorial on how to use JavaScript or how to use HTML. There's a bunch of different videos on YouTube that you can go ahead and watch and learn how to write your own HTML forms and JavaScript. Primarily, this video will be focusing on how do we get this external form that's going to be called somewhere else into a decisions flow. So here is the basics. This is the HTML and JavaScript that I will be using that I have written to demonstrate this. I'll be in this video. I will also be attaching that GitHub repository link. So if you want to download the zip file of this to be able to do the test that I did, you'll be able to find that in the description of the video if you would like to test external forms with decisions. But this is the HTML form that I'll be using. It's pretty simple. It just has a text box, a couple text boxes, a number box, a drop-down list, and a bunch of stuff like that over here. I also have some JavaScript that's running in order to get the data from the HTML form into the decisions flow process. You'll need to have some type of JavaScript, and I'll later on we'll talk about some documentation on where we got this JavaScript. So this is the two collateral we will be using. The main thing on the decision side, let me drag over my screen right here, is going to be this purchase request project. I'll also export this so you'll have access to it for any testing purposes. But inside this, we have a couple of flows here. Specifically, we have the submit purchase request flow. I'm going to go ahead and break this lock so we can get inside of it. Inside of this flow, we have two things. I've separated my logic from the flow. So this is the logic that actually writes the record, assigns it to the appropriate people, and also evaluates the cost. The external form, however, this is the process that we utilize to be able to call an external form and send it to decisions. So now what happens here is whenever a person runs this, what will happen is it's going to call that your URL or wherever you place that external form. So that's one of the main inputs that you'll have to run that external form. In fact, let's kind of run it here just so we can see that process there. Let me just close this real quick, and I'm going to open this back up. So this is the subflow process. And if I go ahead and if I just debug this so you can see what happens, right? What's going to happen is it's going to call that external form, right? I place this wherever you host it, doesn't really matter as long as permitting you have opened up the correct network ports for decisions to talk to that server that houses that external form. And there's no kind of, the networks are able to communicate with each other. So here I've created this form, and what you'll see here is as soon as I have this process here, you can see my debugger, it's paused right here, and then my browser form here has displayed, and this is the external form, very bare bones, that I've written here for a demonstration. And so it's just like any other form. I'm going to fill it out real quick so you can just see how it works. Dun, 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 dun. Oops, I don't want negative. That'd be funny. And I'm going to go ahead and submit this. And then if I go back to my debugger, what you will see here is that it processed, right? This is how we would test when we have a functioning external form process or to see if it does work. If you have any errors here, a couple of the errors that you'll have here will be like, cannot find the data variable. If you have a data variable that's in the external form, and it's sending it to decisions, but decisions doesn't expect that data variable. That's one thing that you'll see here that happens when the data name is unexpected from decisions. It will error out on the external form process. And so here you can see it went through fine, and it processed like any other form inside of the process. All right, now let's dive in and let's talk about the nuts and bolts on how I got that to configure. One of the things you may have noticed is that there is this kind of redirect right here. In my form process, let me open up that HTML. you'll notice that I just have this random action. Now in HTML, this form action means that, hey, if after a person has clicked on this button, in this case, the submit purchase request, it's going to run this action, which is a web page to nowhere. It's just the default one that I found online, and I just left it there. So that's why when I clicked on it, you'll see that it comes up with this. This doesn't mean that it didn't work. It's just that's the menu that appears if you don't have your external form redirect your user to another uh, browser or another location for it. So I just wanted to explain what that was right there. Alrighty, so once that's done, we see that the process went through. So now let's dive in and let's talk about the different specifics inside of this flow that make it work. So we go to the external form process here. And what you're going to see here is we have the first thing that you'll need, which we talked a little bit about, is the URL. This is the location of where that external form resides. So wherever that is, put the URL here, make sure Decisions has access to that other server, and then Decisions, once you click debug, will just call that your URL and display that form. Now, one thing that you'll be aware of is as soon as I drag the external form step right here, you'll notice it doesn't look like the external form step that I've previously configured here. And that's because there's a couple of things that I did here to make it easier for me to demonstrate it. And so I can walk backwards and we can see, okay, what are the steps we have to do. But the first thing you'll notice is that it has no outcome path, right? By default, you need to tell Decisions when you're using an external form what is the outcome path that it needs to traverse so that it can then connect to any other steps within the process. So how do we do that? So if I go ahead and let's click on the external form, click over here, we have the service outcomes. And what this service outcome is that's the outcome path that you need to configure. I can say this is the approved, right? Let's say I'm creating an approval process. This is the approved outcome path. And what you'll see here is as soon as I add that outcome path in the service outcomes, I finally have that tail where I can connect other processes to. So this means that, hey, once a person runs that external form, that once that external form calls that endpoint that's generated from this external form step in Decisions, then it will try to send that data to it and try to traverse it. You can add more outcomes if there's multiple paths. So if there's a deny, right, path, and I click OK, you'll see that now I have two paths where I can say, okay, I want to deny where to go here instead of going to the purchase request logic. So that's how we create the outcome paths. The next step that we have to do is we have to configure the data that's going to be coming out of these steps. Right? Because we have outcome paths, but it's kind of useless if I can't, pass in data from the external form that the user typed in and send that to Decisions, so Decisions can process it and use it for the other steps within that entire business logic process. So how do we do that? Well, one of the things you're going to notice here is that as soon as you add an external or a service outcome rather, you will have your outcomes. And as you see me hovering my mouse over the service outcomes, you'll notice I have this pencil icon. I can click on this pencil icon and I can add parameters. This is the data that this outcome path will expect. So if I wanted to say this is first name, and if I want to say this is let's just say this is DOB, and then I'm obviously going to say that this is a date time, and boom. And once I do that, now you'll notice if I scroll down or on this outcome path, you'll notice that now I have options on the outputs right here where I have DOB and first name right here. So that's what happens. So now you can see on this approved path, I have these two variables. And then on the deny path, let's say I'm going to add the same variables just to be consistent. So first name, and then I'm going to add DOB just so you can see the contrast. Because that's how Decisions works. Whenever there is outcome paths, each outcome path can have its own set of data. Could be the same, could be different. It's just up to the user to configure what data you want to traverse down that outcome path. Now, in my process, I'm going to delete this step right here because I'm going to now go to the germane example that I built here to illustrate some of the nuances that you'll need to configure this. So if I go back to my form process right here, you'll notice that I have in HTML, you have to tie your different properties to an ID of some sort. And what that does is it allows your JavaScript to be able to say, hey, I want to get the value that's stored in that HTML element by its ID, right? This is not a decisions thing. This is just web browsers and just web technology. And when you utilize HTML or JavaScript, that's how they pass data around. So there's a couple of great videos online you can look up if you need more information on this. I'll pop it on the screen right here so that if you want to go ahead and watch it, because we're going to get a little bit into JavaScript and HTML, but not too much, just enough to understand how data passes from the external form to decisions. All right, so in HTML, right, I wrote a very simple form, and I have the ID, which is the requester name, over here. When I flip into my JavaScript, and we're going to go all the way, let's see, I'm going to see if I can scroll all the way up so that we can see more. As we go down here, you'll notice that I have, in this case, I created an event listener from JavaScript. Basically, it just says, hey, if the user clicks on that form button in my HTML, it's going to run this function, right? And you have to configure this function. This doesn't come pre-built. I just built this one so that when I click a button, it will go ahead and send that out. Now, the important things you have to need to know is, right, I'm using this, but I'm getting the element by its ID requester name. And then I'm storing that in a variable requester name right here. And then over here, what I do is I take in all of those form elements, all those variables, and just kind of put it in a simple list over here. Now, why am I emphasizing this? The reason why I emphasize this is because notice that in my JavaScript, I have my variable name requester name. Let's flip back into decisions, and I'm going to show you what the data values that I put in here for the submit outcome are. You'll notice that the parameters right here are exactly the same. So that's why it is important that whatever naming you give your variables in your JavaScript, that has to be the variable names that you put inside of decisions on the service outcome of this external form step. If you don't, then what's going to happen is you're just going to get a lot of, you'll run the form and decisions will just output null values for all the properties that you have. So that's the important thing, and that's why I illustrated both of those, is you have to make sure that that requester name right here, notice that it's the same casing, same everything, it's exact. And that's how we pass it in right here for it. So that's what we did to pass the data from this JavaScript into the parameter that you see here on the service outcome path of that form. So that's how we get the data to be sent to decisions. All right, so now we're going to table that. So that's the first thing. The first thing we talked about is how do we call an external form? You put in the URL, and then, it's magic. It calls that URL and runs that form. Now we spend some time talking about how do we define data we want to come back from that external form. And we said, hey, you have to first create a service outcome. After you create the service outcome, then you define your parameters, all the different data types, and what have you there. One thing to note before we transition off the point of sending data to decisions is and this is just something that I found helpful, is I left the need by date on my service outcome for my external form as a string. The reason why is because when the external form sends the data to the decisions, it's just in the form of a get call, meaning it just has the URL parameters or the get call parameters in the URL. And so it's just easier for me to pass in the date as a string. And then later on in my process, what I did is I just said, hey, when I pass that into my need by date in my subflow, I just did a simple, convert string to a date time, right? And so that's kind of something you can do that's super helpful if because of the setup of how external forms send data to flows. All right, so that's that part. So we're going to finish that point. So that's how we send data to decisions. Now, here's the other thing that we need to be aware of. How do we tell decisions to restart that flow? Right? As you see here, if I run this, what happens is decision is pause. External form behaves very similarly to like an add task, right? The normal add task form in decisions, where it pauses the workflow and it's just waiting until that external system, or in this case, the external form, sends that information to it. So now we need to discuss how do we get the data from decisions to then run the process, right? Hey, the user fills out the form. How do I tell that button from that external form to say, okay, here's the data, go ahead and send it, and then go ahead and rerun that process and restart that flow. There's a great document in Decisions. We're going to go ahead and check this out that talks about external forms. Let's see if I can type that here. But what you'll see in this external forms, I'm going to go for the article, basic external form process. Perfect. What you'll see here is that there are these parameters. There is this kind of JavaScript over here. And this is a very helpful because one of the things you'll notice, right, I'm going to flip back into the purchase request form, is notice I have this data, the step tracking ID, the flow tracking ID, but then I have this callback URL right here, right? And so I need to call back, I need to use the callback URL in decisions to say, okay, once the user has submitted and clicked this submit purchase request button on my external form, I'm going to run this callback URL to restart that process and to get it configured. So that's the next step of the process. And here inside of decisions, as you're writing your own, right, if you've written your own external form, this JavaScript is pretty helpful. You don't need to use it, but all that it does is it just basically goes through the URL and just crafts that callback URL for you in your JavaScript, so you don't have to, statically type in those values. And that's what it does here. It just says, here's the variable, the callback URL. It's gonna get the callback URL and then place it in there in the function right here on the function that's developed here, where it says, hey, here's the callback URL, and then it slowly recrafts all of those different elements here for you. So let me go ahead and show you the one that I've built. So here's the one that I've built. And basically what I did is I said, hey, I want to get my URL. Right here is my own URL. I've set this up as a static over here. And so all I've done is said, okay, I want to get this callback URL. I've established it here. And then I utilize the the parameters from our JavaScript in the document and utilize that to get the flow ID, the step ID, and the outcome path that I want to pass it in through, right? And obviously I put this statically. Some of this isn't the best JavaScript code. This is really just an example of how to call decisions back. And so all you have to do here is on my function for the button, I just said, hey, when someone clicks the button, the last thing I want them to do is after I've gotten all the data, after I've organized it in a form elements kind of constant list, I'm going to go ahead and then call back that URL and then concatenate the different things that I need, right? And so that's what I did here. And that's essentially what I use the form elements for, is I just said, hey, here's my URL parameters. And then I just stored them in the key elements value. And then I'm passing that URL parameters as a string after, getting them set up to be available to the decisions process. Alrighty, so now let's go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and run this so you can just kind of see what happens and what's the URL that it calls. So if I go ahead and minimize this, I'll also post this link in the chat in the description of the video, so you'll have access to it if you want to know what's the JavaScript code. Again, you don't have to use this. This isn't a decisions thing, meaning that you can use different JavaScript commands to recraft that callback URL. You just have to make sure that your URL looks somewhat in the form, let me go back here, somewhat in the form like this, where you have your base portal URL, and this is kind of like what it would be. And then my local host would be changed to be whatever your base portal URL is for your decision server, and then you concatenate the flow ID, the step ID, your outcome path, and then any parameters. Like that's the basic foundation of it. So this isn't literal of you need to call this exact server. It's just here's how you need to craft your callback. And there's a couple of variables, the base port URL, your flow ID, your step ID, your outcome path. Those would be different from mine, but you just have to concatenate those together to create your own callback URL. All right, enough of that. Let's go ahead and let's go back inside of the process. And so what you see here is, let me open up my console logs. I think it's like what, F12. Yeah, I'm gonna go to console logs. And so what you'll see here is I'm gonna go ahead and fill this out. And I'll say this is, yeah, test, test, test. Sure, HR. I'll do the date there. We'll do one, we'll do one, we'll do one. And then I'll submit this, right? And then what you'll see here is now you get to see my callback URL in the console logs. Let's see if I can I make that bigger? And so what happened here is decisions. Yeah, let's like that. So the callback URL that I created is this long one, right? And it had the requester name test, requester name email test, department HR, right? This is just basic HTML and JavaScript right here. I just created a callback URL for the external form to call back decisions, and that's what caused my flow process, if I go back to my debugger, to execute. And when I see this right over here, right, you can see that my purchase request went through inside my process where I have my inputs, the outcome path that I sent to it of the logic was this, or test 1-1, July 4th went through, right? And so these ones right here are the values I put in from that external form, and it confirms that we sent it through to it. So that's the basic thing. So in summary, if you want to use an external form inside of decisions, hey, roger that. We can definitely do that for you. All you have to do is use the external form, set up your URL that you'll call back to, or that you'll have your decision server call. Then what you can do is you can then create a service outcome so that you could then attach that outcome path to the next step in your process. Also defining any parameters, making sure that they're the exact same casing for the variable naming so that decisions can then get that variable there. Then what you can do here is after you do that, then you're going to, in your JavaScript process, create some type of logic that allows you to grab all of the data from that form and then craft your callback URL, which will be custom to you. And then you'll just merely place that in the function of the button or however your web technology that you're using calls back another service. Once you do those three things, then you have a functioning external form process that you can utilize. So if you want the flexibility that you get from like Angular, React, JavaScript, HTML, CSS, in designing your own forms, you can definitely do that. And this is a way that you can then send your information to decisions. Thank you so much. That concludes our external forms lecture.